That's the feeling we've all had. How new shoes would make you glad, but the best times you recall when you wore no shoes at all. Back the days.
Hi, and welcome to another edition of Living Lightly. I'm Dan Dorica. You know, one of the best and easiest ways to live more sustainably is to get your food from local, organic, and small-scale farms, or to grow your food yourself. Today I'll be showing you how I make my own tamales from scratch using nearly all local ingredients. We'll go through the process of nixtamalization, which is the practice of treating corn with lime or wood ash. We'll grind the corn in a special mill to create a meal called masa. Then we'll shape and steam the tamales. Even if you've had authentic Mexican tamales made in this country, it's likely they were made with store-bought masa, and until you've had tamales from freshly ground nixtamalized corn, you haven't tasted them at their full potential. It's a delicious local meal, and though it takes some prep time, it's really worth it in the end. So we're going to start out with the nixtamalization process. First I'm going to talk about the different kinds of corn that I'm using today to make these tamales. I've got two different kinds. One is called Strubbes Orange Dent corn. I grew this variety in my garden last year in a 4-foot by 30-foot bed, and I got maybe 4 gallons of seed out of that. So that's a pretty good amount to make tamales and tortillas throughout the year. This variety is an heirloom corn, and it's also much denser and I think more flavorful and probably more nutritious than this variety, which is a regular organic feed corn that would be used to feed livestock. I bought this bag full of that feed corn from a local dairy farm for about $4 or $5. So it's a good amount of corn. I'm cutting it with my own homegrown corn just to make it go a little bit further. But clearly it's like much lighter, more airy, and just probably not as nutritious. It also has a different texture in the flour, in the masa that we're going to be making when we grind up this corn. It's much more likely to fall apart during the boiling process, which is part of the nixtamalization process. So my recipe is to take 3 cups of your flour corn, and you can use pretty much any flour corn for this. So I'm going to use about 2 cups of my own homegrown Strubbes Orange Dent corn, and I'm going to add another cup or so of this feed corn. And then just put it in a pot. And to this I would normally add a gallon of water. I'm not going to do that because I've actually already done it and I've boiled some of another batch of this, so I'm just going to sort of demonstrate. And then this is pickling lime, which is just what you'd use for making cucumber pickles or other pickles. You have to be kind of careful with it because if it gets in your eyes, it's kind of caustic. I put 2 tablespoons of pickling lime into the water and corn mixture in the pot, and then I just put it on the stove to boil for about 15 minutes. You can do anywhere from 15 to 45 minutes. That's what I've seen in different recipes. I've also seen higher ratios of lime to corn. One problem that I've had is when I used more lime in my recipe, I would have digestive issues when I ate the tamales eventually. I think it was just too much lime, and so it would upset my stomach. So I've cut back the lime. Haven't noticed any difference in the flavor. That's one of the things about the reason we're going through this whole process is to nixtamalize the corn, which changes the flavor and the nutritional value. It makes proteins in the corn much more available. That's why it's been done for thousands of years. But if you've ever tasted the difference between regular cornmeal and nixtamalized cornmeal, it has a very unique flavor. It's the flavor of tortilla chips and tamales and tortillas as well. I really love the effect that it has on the corn. Adds a great flavor. Now I'll just go grab the batch that I did a couple of days ago. Okay, so this is what we've ended up with. I boiled this for about 15-20 minutes. It's just the corn, the lime, and the water. and then I let it sit overnight. Well, this is actually sat for a little longer than that, but you can do it just overnight, and that gives the lime time to do its work. And the first thing you want to do is to wash the corn off, wash all the lime water off of it. So we'll start by doing that with this strainer. So we're just trying to rinse as much of the lime off as possible. You can see the corn has held its shape pretty well. The yellow corn, the feed corn, seems to fall apart, like I said, much easier than the Strubbes Orange. There's also a little bit mixed in here of a Oaxacan green corn. I grew a small amount of that, so there's a little bit of it mixed in with the Strubbes Orange. So the next step in the process is to wipe the skin off of each one of the kernels, like not individually, but you're trying to do that the whole mess of corn at the same time. So we got a mess of corn and water in here, and we'll just sort of squeeze it through our hands like that. The water is pretty cold. And we'll try just decanting some of it off to get the skins off first. Although this process of removing the skin on the corn is something that's recommended and traditionally done, I haven't found that it has a super negative effect on the masa eventually. The only thing that I'm thinking is maybe some of the lime is soaked into the skin, and maybe that's part of the reason why I was having problems with too much lime being left in the corn. So now we're ready to grind this. Let's set up the mill. Okay, so we are ready to start grinding. Let's dump some corn into the hopper here and start cranking. This is actually a pretty special mill. It's made for grinding corn, grinding masa like this. It also makes really good falafel mix if you put raw chickpeas through it. But the way that I usually set it up is I start grinding with this set really loose until I start seeing some corn going through there, and then I tighten it up. Because if you tighten it too much too early, it just doesn't seem to get as fine of a grind on the corn. Some of the instructional videos or websites that I've seen, they talk about putting it through this grinder up to 4 times, and I haven't found that I really need to do that. I don't mind it being a coarser grind. I think the adjustment that I talked about earlier can help make it a fine enough grind. All right, so it looks like we're done. Just knock some of the excess out of the mill, and this is what we end up with. Nicely ground masa. So making up the batter, I'm starting with about 1.5 sticks of butter, and this is a cutoff from a pound of butter. It's from a local Mennonite family that has 1 cow, and I go over and get large amounts of butter in one trip. And this is my own canned sweet corn from last year, so I'll add that. I'm going to be mixing this into the masa. Just simple Simple ingredients. We'll just let the butter melt and then we'll mix it in with the masa. As you can see, I'm using my wood stove. Just happened to be convenient that the wood stove was hot right now. It's in the morning. We're done melting the butter. Now we're going to add the corn and butter to the masa. We'll add a tablespoon or a teaspoon of salt. And you can salt to taste. You might need a little bit more than that. I'm going to test it, but it's pretty important to add the salt to bring out the flavor of the corn. Add a little bit of water here just to get the right consistency. The corn will still be able to take up some of the moisture even though it's been soaking for so long. So we'll let this sit for a little bit just to let the masa soak up the moisture, and then we'll look at it again and see what the consistency is. So looking at it, it has soaked up some of the moisture, so I'm going to add more water. Really want it to be pasty enough to spread it on the corn husk easily. I would say this is a good consistency, like a wet cookie dough. And it's not vital that you get the moisture right as long as you don't get it too wet, because they're being steamed and they'll take up moisture as they're steaming. You just might end up with a little drier product if you don't add quite enough water. So we're ready to start shaping the tamales, and the first thing that we have to do is soak corn husks. I bought this bag of corn husks at an Asian market. They're about $4 for this bag. You can also get them at a lot of grocery stores, especially ones that have like a Latino population in the area. And it's the only thing that I really haven't figured out how to grow myself. I think the varieties of corn that I grow are just not big enough to produce this big of a husk to make a good tamale wrapper. I have used some of my own husks for wrapping tamales, but they're just always smaller than these ones are. And the way that we treat these is put a bunch of them into a pot and pour water over them and heat that water up. They will imbibe, take on the water, and get sort of pliable so that we can move them and shape them to wrap up the tamale batter with. All right, we are ready to make the tamales. Tamale wrappers, the corn husks, have been soaking in the hot water for a while, and they're nice and pliable and going to be easy to work with now. So what I do is I find the smallest husks, like these ones, to make these little strips that I'm going to use to tie the tamales on the ends. There's different designs of tamales and different ways that they're wrapped. A lot of times, traditionally, I've seen them wrapped where they're just sort of folded over and they're not tied. And you've probably seen the kind where they look sort of like a sausage with the ends tied up. And that's the kind that I've traditionally been making myself. I think the other ones are easier to make a large amount of them because you don't have to do as much tying up. But they tend not to look as pretty, and I have a hard time getting them to sit in the pot properly without falling over and spilling the contents everywhere. All right, so put this over here maybe and start with a large wrapper. Another thing that I've done when I've made tamales in the past, this is a very simple recipe with just the corn, masa, and salt. And another thing that I've done in the past is I will put a blob of the batter in the wrapper, and I'll have some beans and cheese made up. I'll put some cheese, line some cheese in there, and some beans as well. It takes a little bit more time that way, and it's easy enough to make a side dish of beans and eat them at the same time so that you don't have to wrap up everything into the tamale wrapper. But you know, usually tamales are made with some kind of meat in them. These ones are just corn and salt, and that's it. So I just basically rolled up the contents in the wrapper, and although I do this quickly, I've had people help me, and I realize how long it takes sometimes to learn how to do this in a way that's tight and gives you a nice looking tamale. It's just a matter of sort of pinching the contents down into the middle, making sure that it's well wrapped up, and then twisting the end and putting the ties on a tightly wound end, and then you end up with a tamale that looks like that. We'll put that in the pot. I've got a steamer in this pot, just a basket steamer. Another great wrapper for tamales that I don't really have access to, I suppose I could buy it at an Asian food store, is banana leaves. Banana leaves impart a delicious, unique flavor to tamales that you don't get from the corn husks. So this is it. Pot full of tamales. Now I'll pour the rest of the water in there, and then I might have to put a little bit more in to bring it up to the right level. And I'm going to steam these for 45 minutes with the lid on, obviously. And then we'll come back and we'll see what we got. The timer just went off, and it is time to eat some all local tamales. So we've reached the moment of truth and deliciousness now. I'm gonna open up a jar of fire roasted salsa with all homegrown ingredients that I canned last year. Nothing like fire roasted salsa. If you've ever made it before, this is really the only way to make salsa. Grilling all veggies, onions, tomatoes, peppers on the open fire, and then grinding up the ingredients gives it a nice smoky flavor. And dish myself out a couple of these tamales. Just slide the ties off of them, unwrap them, and voila, finished product. Smells pretty good. Just dab on a little bit of fire roasted salsa. Delicious. So living sustainably doesn't have to mean sacrifice always. You can have something that you really couldn't find anywhere else unless, I guess, you went to Mexico. I think it's worth all the effort. It's actually not that much work for the amount of food that you get, and it's just like nothing you will ever get anywhere else in any restaurant. So how can you put a price on that? Well, I hope you enjoyed this edition of Living Lightly on how I make my own homegrown tamales from scratch using all organic and local ingredients. Don't forget to visit my website, hardcoresustainable.com, and also subscribe to my channel and share and like this video. Thanks for watching.
I can remember how proud I used to be when Dad and Mother would buy new shoes for me. Now that's the feeling we've all had, how new shoes would make you glad, but the best time you recall when you wore no shoes at all. Back the days